Einen schönen guten Abend. Vielen Dank fürs Kommen. Nachdem dieser Abend in Englisch stattfinden wird und wir Gäste haben, die Spanisch und Englisch sprechen, werde ich jetzt auch auf Englisch wechseln. A very warm welcome to Cristina Gamboa and Miriam Garcia from Barcelona, to Michael Obrist from Vienna, and to Mike Novotny, who will lead us through the evening. I just want to say some very few words about this sequence of talks that we are holding under the name of Klimawechsel, which is a little bit difficult to translate because it translates as climate change, but basically it's a more radical change even in thinking, and I think this is what we want to reflect on is how we can really achieve this radical questioning of the status quo. And I think what we'll see in your lectures, in your project, is exactly such a radical questioning of the status quo, which is, as we said in our slogan, the thing that we should most be afraid of, namely the status quo. And we loosely arranged these 3 evenings around the ESG criteria: environmental, social, and governance. We had a wonderful evening 2 weeks ago about the topic of environmental. And of course, these things cannot be completely separated from each other, but this evening is dedicated to the social, and I think it will become quite clear what a huge amount of topics come together in this under this name and the complex topic of the social. So I hand over to Mike Novotny, who will do the real introduction. And before that, I want to say thank you to ZV, to the Zentralvereinigung der Architektinnen, and of course to the IBA for hosting and co-hosting this event with us today.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you, everyone. Also, thank you to the IBA and the ZV. I'm happy to host the second of the 3 installments of the Klimawechsel. My name is Mike Novotny. My introduction will be brief because we are looking forward to the lectures, which I'm going to introduce just in a minute. Yes, we're living in turning times. The turnover of governments and prime ministers is faster than it used to be, if you forgive the little topical joke. We live in times of social turn, of the ecological turn, hopefully. Or to put it in the terms of a recent exhibition and symposium in Graz, a territorial turn, a change of focus and a paradigm shift in how we regard and how we practice architecture and how we interact with landscape. We see paradigm shifts in these times of crises. Crises demand innovations and inventiveness. And more than just a reaction to the disasters we are facing, which we are probably going to face in the future, but maybe you could call it some kind of planned resilience, a social resilience, or as we say in Vienna, social sustainability, one of the pillars of social housing in Vienna, which you can see in the exhibition around here, if you're here. For the people who are watching at home, who are for mysterious reasons not here, please come to the IBA Center and look at the fantastic exhibition here. And of course, ecological resilience, which is referenced in the title of the symposium of the talk here, Klimawechsel, climate change. And it all comes together in architecture. It comes together in housing and in public space, in houses and in the spaces between them. And this is what we're going to talk about today. And we're very happy to open a dialogue between Barcelona and Vienna, and I'm sure we will have, in Vienna we have a lot to learn from Barcelona. And we will have 2 talks by Cristina Gamboa and Miriam Garcia. And I'm happy to introduce first Cristina Gamboa from La Colle. You are probably familiar with their work and what they're doing. You can see one of their works, which we're going to see today too, right now at the exhibition at the AZW, about the EU Mies van der Rohe Award, because it was awarded the special prize in the category of emerging architecture. The La Borda housing project in Barcelona. La Colle Arquitectura Cooperativa was founded in 2009. It consists of how many people? Lots of people. You can't count them. 11 people, yes, at the moment. And the Cooperativa is also nominated for the Schelling Prize, which will be awarded next week in Germany. So we're looking forward to that too. And of course, forms of cooperative housing is something we are familiar with in Vienna, but of course is also something which we will have a lot to learn about, and we're happy for you to teach us something. Welcome, Christina.
So, hello everyone and good evening. Thank you to stay here, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share our work today. And basically, I will, for the aim of the presentation is really to focus in the project of La Borda as a pioneer project in the framework of new ways of producing housing in the city of Barcelona. And basically, this is part of how we understand also certain transformative practices in the city linked to social engagement and this idea of community control. That's why we understand housing also as a community infrastructure in the city in order to allow residents, people to really remain also with process of gentrification and also the effects of the kind of the policies and the speculation in our environment. And basically, and of course, because when we are talking about cooperative housing in the European context, we have to say that it's an emerging model in our context. So we started, I would say, 10 years ago, more or less. So if we compare with the 100 years of experience in Switzerland, or I guess also kind of along more here, for us it's kind of an emerging. It's just kind of the beginning, and we are learning about the process. But in our case, it's been an absolutely response to a housing crisis, and basically based on the different kind of movements and urban activism really active in the city. And I think that this is or has been crucial for us. So LACOL is a cooperative of architects that is based in Sants. Sants is a popular neighborhood, a workers' neighborhood in the city of Barcelona, with a strong tradition of self-management, autonomous movements, workers' association, and different institutions that was basically ways to generate a sense of belonging and to fight for their rights from the last century until today. So this idea of the social engagement of a neighborhood to deal with the urban challenges was something that we were, in a way, involved in a kind of a natural way, being part of this, not kind of leading it, just bringing our knowledge, our skills as students, as architects, after just trying to be part and to work together with the neighborhood. And basically it was as part of Can Batlló. Can Batlló is the last big industrial or formal industrial area to be reconverted, and it was the final project from for 3 of the members of LACOL. So it was the way to link to the neighborhood, to know the community, to understand kind of the social urban challenges. And Can Batlló, in fact, has become a paradigmatic experience of the bottom-up transformation of the city. And this image that you were looking before was precisely May 2011, when 1 month after the Occupy movement in the squares as a kind of a public kind of a counter power, this idea of all the European policies of scarcity in a really kind of convulsed, kind of intense moment, where many people were kind of present in the squares, in the public realm. 1 month later, this kind of energy and power was kind of moved to the different neighborhoods, and many initiatives also were kind of related with that. But precisely in Sans, this was a kind of a tic-tac strategy, a countdown. It was a strike for 30 years, just trying to understand the future of this area. And with the crisis, economical crisis of 2007, 8, etc., it was totally a stop. So the neighborhood took the initiative and basically had kind of an entrance to the site and started the reconversion and the transformation of it. And with Red, it's kind of the first kind of spaces and projects, initiatives that were kind of colonizing this huge area, which it was also kind of in a change from the private to the public, and just waiting the public to have the resources, the initiative, the ideas to start doing that. And it was an opportunity for us to understand even new protocols of understanding the provision of architecture with the people, the skills, the materials, and kind of also the kind of redefining needs and programs. And basically, it was also kind of the seed to understand how Cambodia can become a cooperative neighborhood. It was also in a moment where, precisely because of all this kind of dismantle of the welfare state in Spain, where in the neighborhood it was kind of a movement and even kind of different projects trying to understand how we can bring from the cooperative sector different solutions. In a way, how we can solve individual needs through a collective response. And it was kind of the opportunity to bring to the practice in the realm of Cambodia all those ideas. So that's why when we are kind of talking about housing and the policies, we were in a state that basically it was kind of in between the market and the state, the production of housing. So with the context of cooperative sector, social economy, and the community, we were trying to build this idea of the third sector also as kind of an agent. So it was this idea of the citizens as instigators of this new emergent model of cooperative housing. And something interesting, and maybe it's for us is really different when we compare data, is that as a context, and in Barcelona we have 1.52% of social housing. So the private sector is totally controlling the market. There are no tools, no measures to control the prices, so speculation. So the main goal of this new model is precisely to try to increase the affordable market, try to avoid the speculation. But it was interesting also to understand how all this approach to housing was also linked to the right to the housing. It's a really dense and compact city with the mountains, the sea, and different cities. So the effects of this lack of housing, it's really have an impact in terms of the social fabric. So this idea of also how we were dealing in that moment also with evictions, with problem health, and every time more and more with the concept also about the energy. And we are talking about affordability in terms of housing, but with the increase of the energy price, we were also kind of having more and more families suffering with energy poverty and really even health problems linked to the housing conditions, and of course because of the instability of the housing situation. So the approach that we wanted to give as a model from Cambodia, from the social movements, and also where as La Colle, when we started to work with it, it is kind of this cross-sectional approach that are trying to understand this idea of infrastructures for a more sustainable living in the broadest ways possible, political, economical, social, and environmental. And basically, and I will try to go fast, this idea of this new cooperative housing model, because it was a model of construction, cooperative construction of housing. Once the housing was finished, the cooperative was kind of closed, the property was divided, and it was just private housing. So that's why we call it a kind of a new cooperative housing based on collective ownership. And this is precisely the key point in our context, that people as inhabitants, it's member of the cooperative, has the right of use, an unlimited right of use of one apartment, but cannot speculate because the owner is the co-op. And the co-op is a non-profit co-op, which also it's a mechanism that allows cooperative housing to develop public land in the city. And this basically had as a kind of as a consequences or as a kind of a potential, this idea that which this is not a speculative, it's led, or at least has started to be a model led by the community, affordable and trying to be as inclusive as possible in every kind of development and any initiative, sustainable with this broadest way that I was presenting, and replicable. The idea was we don't want to generate a project in Cambodia, for example. We really want to understand it as a model to see that there is a political impact of each decision from the funding to the architecture, and really want to be something that can be adapted to different contexts, different communities and different parts of the city, even the Catalan context or Spanish context. So it was kind of a responsibility in the process about being coherent, about kind of the values and how each action, it's really thinking in this idea of replicability. And basically, as I was saying, it's basically kind of a short process of time. In 2004, there is kind of a first research talking about the model, but it was 2012 with the beginning of the process of Laborda, when kind of the model kind of emerged more kind of rapidly. And it was also because of the collaboration of the municipality. In that moment, the municipality established these two pilot projects, Laborda in a public plot, and Princesa, which is an existing building also following this model. And what the municipality had and could do is basically this idea of the leasehold of the land. So as I was saying, Barcelona it's really compact. There is few land available and few public buildings or kind of resources. So basically the municipality made a leasehold of 75 years of the land to the cooperative, and the cooperative pays an annual fee around 4,000 euros per year. And this also blocks that the property of the land will never go to the private market. And so it was just the basic kind of first resource that the agreement with the municipality proposed. So the system is based in the funding of the social economy, and it was kind of the second kind of big part of the model. So trying to skip the conventional private bank, which has been part of all these kind of machines of speculation in the city, and also because they will not help or support a project based on collective ownership, which cannot have kind of an individual with the risk of the loan. So it was with the support of the social and solidarity economy that it was possible to build this project, and many of them that are kind of going further. And basically, as I was saying, with this mechanism of the leasehold of the land, with these two pioneer projects, it was kind of the beginning of testing if this can become a policy. And I would say 3 years, almost 2 years later, 2016, if I'm not wrong, the municipality established the new housing plan. And basically, what is interesting is that in that moment, the housing plan 2016-2025, and here it was in the middle of the development process of Laborda. Cooperative housing was introduced as one of the many policies that the municipality had, because basically Barcelona has a huge kind of challenge that really want to have the 15% of affordable housing in 2027. So the idea was to establish many lines of work, and one of it is the boosting the social market, and here is where cooperative enters. And precisely they promote two actions: the creation of a cooperative housing committee, this idea that we can sit in a table, all the different stakeholders, the municipality, the public agents and administration, technicians, and also communities, trying to understand the challenges and the ways that we can co-produce all these policies, and also are starting a series of public tender for more sites. So this is interesting how basically this idea of starting with pilot projects, but also at the same time trying to develop policies that can support it has been fundamental in the city of Barcelona. and basically arriving to a moment where kind of nowadays many projects are in different phases from conviviality. La Borda has started to be in use to people moved there 3.5 years ago. And there are projects under construction, a couple of them also that are started to be inhabited. And I would say like a total of 19 projects in the Barcelona area, metropolitan area under development. So it's been kind of a short process, but quite intense. So it's also a moment just by always kind of learning by doing and understanding also kind of the potential of the users to be part of these different moments and the spaces of decision and control. And so this was how we kind of entered to this idea of cooperative architecture. And basically, through the process of La Borda, that is what I will kind of present, is the opportunity to understand a species of innovation in the production of housing. And this is something that with the same I would say with the same values, we had the opportunity to develop kind of different variations. And I think this is La Borda, and this is kind of the different housing projects that we are developing, but are really based in kind of the main ideas, which are totally linked with this idea of the model, self-development, collective ownership, the community interaction, sustainability, and comfort and affordability, and how we can give kind of a response from architecture. And the first point, and crucial, and different from the public typical or with like the typical procedures to produce public housing, which is that we know the user and it's involved in the process. And this is key to really challenge regulations, standards, kind of mindsets. And this is something that without this point, I think it would be not possible to really build La Borda as it is. This idea of an open infrastructure, following Habraken, this idea of it's kind of a support that can change through time and adapt to the community and offer kind of different typologies and different programs even through time. The idea of a new program, which in Barcelona was something totally kind of new. We even didn't have even a laundry, so it was kind of a step forward to start imagining certain common areas. A process of awareness, like how people in this process are more aware about how we are living, the impact, the environmental impact of all these actions, and how we can be critical about the construction, the use, the lifespan of the building, and this idea of an active user with a passive building. And finally, affordability, and this is kind of the main challenge of the model also, and how architecture, without losing certain qualities, just by a matter of understanding, which is kind of the main focus, we can reduce the cost by simplicity, phases, and again, this idea of challenging the standards, regulations, etc., etc. And it was all this process that it took almost 4 years since we started like the architectural project and people even move them. And it was a series of kind of workshops and a species of participation that it was linked to the different phases and questions that the architect can have, from the program, the imaginary, to the environmental goals, for example, and even the construction materials. And this was our key also to really decide and do what we did. So establishing kind of these new tools, these new spaces, kind of the language, the models, and how we can also kind of move as architects to new formats. And starting by kind of a survey of the context, the user, understanding which is the real need, and how can we redefine the conventional user of the family prototype for a collective housing, and also how we can understand the economic impact of housing, energy, and how this is part of this kind of process of discussing continuously about the priorities and strategies of the building, from a flexible housing system to a really passive building to reduce the energy cost, and other kind of data that was crucial, like mobility. We managed to change the regulation of parking after a huge kind of work with the technicians of the administration. So also this idea of the responsibility to push for certain regulatory changes that has an impact more than in a project to the city. And this was basically the idea to reduce the impact of the construction of the parking, to have more kind of budget to really invest in other parts of the building, and also provoke or promote a more sustainable model of mobility. And this idea that we have kind of a specific surface, how we can distribute it, and how like also the appearance of these community spaces and community areas, it's also affecting the characteristics of the housing. So we are not building less units, we are maybe building a bit smaller, but because we are collectivizing services and parts of the program. And this is also part of this strategy of reduction. And when we are applying a laundry, and I will talk about this at the end, when we have a laundry, for example, we are reducing the consumption of energy and water. We can be more aware about certain practices, and all these kind of reflections from the program to the construction was part of the environmental goals of the project. And because of the budget, we really focus on energy, the reduction of the energy demand, and the reduction of the materials as something also kind of really kind of visible as a new way of building it. And just entering to the building. And this is a kind of a process that it's really being present, and it's kind of we are kind of doing again and again in each with each community, with each kind of urban plot. I think the process is being kind of replicated in a way. And when we arrived to Labordo, this is kind of the industrial area, it was again this idea of which spaces do we have in the neighborhood and in the area that we cannot kind of duplicate it, replicate it. And this idea of kind of which spaces are part of these different levels of community. And this idea of understanding the building as a transition from the public. Also even opening a public passage to really connect the future area of Can Batlló, organizing to the common areas in the ground floor and first floor, where in the north facade, and then arriving to the most private areas and the units in a building which it was really depth, 24 meters, so this need for a courtyard, but it was also part of it became kind of the core of the community in a more kind of sense of belonging in a social way, but also as an environmental device. Once we close it with this greenhouse, this also became a collective energy saver device, which also was kind of reducing the envelope of the building, make it more compact, which also it was a reduction of the cost, and also making all the spaces in different levels and floors kind of easy to appropriate all over the year, no? And also this idea of densification of the south facade, and just kind of understanding the transition in terms of publicness in the north facade and the facade to the street, but also that we allocate the flats in the upper floors to have the maximum comfort. So this kind of unbalanced section with 24 out of 28 units in the south facade, and 2 more in the upper floors, and how this idea of this device, that it's kind of the core of the community activities, circulations, relationships, informal relationships, but also the space that has a climatic behavior and helps in summer and winter and summer to reduce the demand, to increase ventilations. And it's kind of something that generates different spaces of comfort, from the common areas to this multi-purpose room, to arriving to the terraces and upper floors. So once the strategy in terms of volume in the city and environmental performance, the volume was kind of defined, and the last part of the design was precisely just established how we would define the typologies, no? And the idea was this: establish a matrix of non-hierarchical spaces that can be kind of interconnected in different ways, and generates kind of several typologies, and using a kind of a legal tool. But precisely the yellow rooms are common areas of private use. So basically we were just registering or understanding as a housing unit the smallest unit possible in Barcelona, which is 40 square meters, and just plus adding these different rooms, we can increase or decrease the size of the flat. But this was also something that allows the cooperative to manage it through time, so to change with different and simple mechanisms the configuration of a housing, which in the regulations and bureaucracy of Spain, it's quite complicated. And once this kind of matrix and system was defined, it was just a matter of establishing different levels of participation, the position of the installation core with the bathroom, the position of the kitchen, and then the users will use the spaces based on their specific needs and programs, and through a kind of slight elements that will provide themselves, and it's kind of been regulated by a manual that we were kind of discussing with them. So we just kind of certain rules to define this naked infrastructure and these different levels of appropriation and participation, and also a strategy to really reduce the cost of the interior kind of layouts. And here it's how we arrived to this kind of collage of different typologies, different units and configuration with a quite systematic structure, that the structure became kind of the distribution or the kind of typology system became a structure. And here it was part of this idea of sustainability and responsibility. The cooperative really want to show another way of building it was possible. And it was kind of a mandate for us to really work in different scenarios, from concrete to steel structure to wood, and to, with a really low budget, try to propose CLT structure. And basically, because of this really kind of domestic spans, like with 3.6 meters, we define these 12 centimeters wood walls and also slabs of 12 centimeters. And once the structure was defined, also taking in consideration that the typologies can connect or not, so it's kind of a system of openings and walls. But once the wood was defined, the distribution and the building was defined. And it was also an opportunity to understand when we can reduce the insulation, because there are no kind of thermal kind of connection in between in the terraces, the facades. So it was also a way to understand how we can build in another way, because we use this material, and how with kind of this economic detail approach, we can build a project like this in 850 euros per square meter. And basically, then it was this idea to invest in the structure, in kind of in certain elements, but then we use kind of really technologies, systems that we know that are from Lacaton Basal and other references, cheap and affordable. So this idea of beauty and aesthetics, it's also totally linked to the idea of affordability, no? And basically just some images of this ground floor with a cooperative of organic food, also a project of the neighborhood, this public passage that will connect the park. And also we start to see this multi-purpose room that in summary is totally linked with the public realm and the city. This courtyard with all the parking bikes behind us now, which is the condition to not having the car parking underground. This connection of the common area with the future park, arriving to this multi-purpose room, the future laundry, this idea of non-finished construction and phases. So also challenging a bit kind of what it's a finished building. It's present in the building and a process of finishing through time. And also as a way to learn of the real needs, and also to be really active as a community in order to understand if something has to be changed, of doing maintenance, and just even adapting certain kind of previous decisions. So this is the future laundry, the guest rooms in the first and second floor, arriving to this connection through the courtyard, to the terraces, and spaces inside, because of these areas inside the greenhouse that are quite warm in winter, and so different spaces of different conditions of comfort through the building to move even during the year. And when we arrived inside the flats, this idea of the naked infrastructure and really simple detailing, basically just a concrete forgive inertia and mass, also because of fire and acoustic regulations and the different layerings of the wood in all the walls. But we have the wood in the ceilings because it has this hygrothermic comfort, and really in Barcelona it's a really humid, the humidity is really present. It's regulating and the sense of a drier environment is really present, so it helps a lot. And every user was kind of finishing, painting and finishing these spaces. So I became super different, and this is just one with the kitchen in the middle, and this relation with the south facade with really simple systems of shadow, that this idea that the user has to open, ventilate, move the curtains, arriving to this kind of the south facade, which is quite different from the north facade. Also with this idea of Barcelona and the blocks of Barcelona with a quite urban facade, but then an interior facade full of galleries, balconies, which is something that we really like it. But suddenly the south facade is the facade to the park. So it was kind of the rear facade, but it's becoming the main facade of the building. And just to end, I wanted to mention the last point, which I'm almost on 30. So that as a learnings from the experience, we talk about kind of a cooperative housing model, about a kind of a cooperative architecture as a kind of a learning process, but the conviviality, what bring it was this idea of cooperative practices as the possibility to establish different protocols for this idea of sustainable living. And it was the opportunity to kind of compare the different simulations that we did of the building in the design phases and how they are really kind of reducing the energy demand, the energy cost. But the first or the most important thing, it was how after the first year of conviviality, we as the cooperative and also with the part of architecture, we try to understand the impacts of the building. And first report was done with the social, economical, environmental impact of the building in terms of social economy, in terms of the energy reduction. And I think this sense of awareness and this community control allows precisely to introduce new practices, to establish new protocols. And as I was saying, with the Laudry, it was obvious that it was kind of an understanding of the process of using them, of analyzing how we can kind of reduce the water, the energy, et cetera, consumption, even the temperature of the water, which it was the highest consuming level, that was the temperature of the water. So this idea of that we have the data, the information, and the space to decide and apply these kind of measures. And suddenly arrive also the finishing of certain common areas, new protocols of use, and starting also to understand even the impact in terms of consumption, the food, the production, the energy. So every time more and more the community became stronger, and COVID arrived. And suddenly, and I will end with this video, I will take the sound probably. The most interesting thing, it was to see how the community was able to establish new protocols of care, and how the building and this kind of situations where it was a kind of a connected terrace, or we had kind of also all these common areas allow certain levels of relation with safety, but the community was felt absolutely privileged to have the control of the environment that surrounded them, because in Spain we had a super strong lockdown. Just all families had to be at home for 3 months, kids without any kind of relation with the outdoor. So suddenly Laborde decided to understand a household as the building and develop their own protocols of care, solidarity, helping elderly people, helping people that maybe were suffering, were more kind of with specific needs, but also kids. And there were kind of a project of a smaller school to allow also the parents to work at the same time, this idea of kind of conciliation, which it was difficult. And La Borda became a gym, or became even a concert hall where some people were kind of playing music, or became even a space of dinner with distancing, but with this kind of social interaction. So it was kind of interesting to see how the building was behaved in this context. And I think that with that, I'm finishing. It's this idea that basically I mentioned it, and I think it's the vision of Lacolle when we talk about that, but also understanding that at the end, this is a certain kind of learnings and modes of operation that are being applied in different spheres. And this idea of understanding housing as an infrastructure, it's also been applied as a species of economy, with an incubator of social economy lead for the community, a species of work in the city, of culture. So I think at the end is understanding how we can develop projects and initiatives from this social engagement. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christina. It was quite a lovely story and a lovely finish, like how you showed that in times of crisis like the COVID, it actually showed you what, or showed the project what it actually is in the definition of a household, and the whole thing becomes, by definition, a household. I also quite like the long story in the beginning, all these diagrams that showed how just to construct this one building of cooperative housing, you actually constructed the whole policy of cooperative housing, which of course takes a long time. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about later here on the podium. Moving on, but staying in Barcelona, slightly moving from the house scale to the city scale, but we keep, as you mentioned, or as you said, the protocols of care. I think we will follow on with that. The super blocks or super ilas, I think we've all heard of them. The much discussed urban strategy of, in the case of Barcelona, maybe also to give the city back to the people in a way. There have been efforts to copy this in other cities, also in Vienna, with different opinions on how successful that was. So we will talk about that now, or we will hear about that now. And on the other side of Barcelona, of course, there is the sea, which in times of crisis, ecological climate crisis, becomes not just something pleasant where you hang out, but something powerful and threatening, and something which also demands strategies in terms of blue and green infrastructure. We are happy to welcome Miriam Garcia from Land Lab Barcelona. She founded Land Lab and Landscape Laboratory Office in Barcelona with Jordi Miro-Abago. She's a professor in Colombia and Madrid and Barcelona, and member of the European Commission's Climate Neutral and Intelligent Cities Assembly and of the Scientific Committee of Europe and Europe. I hope I got that right. So we're very happy to have you here in Vienna. Welcome, Miriam. The stage is yours.
Okay, so, well, oh no. Yeah, so good evening, and thank you for the invitation to join this challenging discussion. I am going to share with you the process and the implementation of two large-scale public space transformation projects in Barcelona, in which we are involved. Both of them are linked with the general title of the series, Klimawechsel, as a fundamental alignment shift in the design of public spaces by incorporating a long-term social and environmental agenda. So I am going to talk about the superblocks and also about the last area of the waterfront of the city of Barcelona, that there are now projects that are in process, but I imagine that you all have listened a lot about the superblocks Barcelona, but I just want to make a super quick introduction. First of all, we need to know that Barcelona is really a small city. It's a city of 100 square kilometers and really dense. We are 1.6 million people. So it's 3 times the density of Vienna. And at the same time, Barcelona is a city with really small and medium parks, but not with large parks. And the percentage of green space is 6 meters per habitant, when the World Health Organization, as you know, recommend more or less 10. So I would say that Barcelona is really a city of streets. I'm saying that because, as you have said, no, there are many cities that are trying to rethink the idea of the superblocks, but the superblocks are also, at the beginning, no, are linked also with the density and the urban framework of the city of Barcelona, and that makes sense, no? So from the very first beginning, the idea of the superblocks was something, let's say, simple, no? Was just trying to transform some of the, trying to transform the city in a green grid. And in order to do that, one of each 3 of the streets of the enlargement of Cerda transformed it into a pedestrian and green streets. Of course, all this was under umbrella of the ecosystem urbanism principles. So it was not only about mobility, or it was not only about green spaces, it was also about giving the city back to the people and empower commercial local uses. And now, in times of systemic crisis of the planet, when we need to face climate change and biodiversity loss, it's also about trying to balance the metabolic behavior of the city. So this is a long story that started many years ago, and then this idea of the superblock was tasted in some areas of the city of Barcelona by this kind of successful tactical urbanism. I have to say that I was not engaged in this part of the process, but I was living in one of the neighborhoods in Poblenou, and also my office was there. At the beginning, people, I would say that not everybody was happy with this idea of taking the cars away, so it was a lot of discussion and a hard work from this city council in order to explain what was behind this idea of taking cars away and giving the city back to the citizen, but also the necessity to reintroduce and renaturalize the city. Luckily, or not luckily, but when the COVID came, people realized the importance of public green spaces in the city. No? So after the COVID, the city of Barcelona decided to put this or move this idea of the superblocks from the tactical urbanism to constructed phase. But first of all, in order to do that, they decided to scale up the idea of the superblock of Barcelona. It was not only about the superblock, it was about the whole city. And in order to do that, this idea of the superblock was linked also with the green and biodiversity plan of the city of Barcelona, and also with the mobility plan. So some of the main axes of the streets were chosen to be transformed in these pedestrian streets. As you can see from the ideal model to the reality, the superblocks are not all they don't have the same size, they don't have the same dimensions, because they are trying to also become green corridors. So in a way, they are providing kind of matrix of ecological and biodiversity support for the city. And then when you move that to the scale of the streets, you realize how important has been, and you will see it in the projects, to try to introduce as much green spaces as we can, because we are not only transforming a street for cars into a street for people, we are also creating the ecological matrix of the whole city to face climate change, to improve the quality of the air, and so on and so forth. Plus that, this vision of the superblocks also merged with an idea and a strategy also of the city of Barcelona to face urban floods due to climate change effect. So there is a huge new vision and a huge new plan of sustainable drainage system in the city that has also been integrated and mixed with the idea of the superblocks, trying to transform the urban public spaces also into a kind of a sponge matrix to face future floods due to climate change effects. All the drainage system of the city of Barcelona almost nowadays is a grey infrastructure, and the municipality wants to use green infrastructure as a sustainable, resilient drainage urban system. So that means that the streets that are in the superblocks also need to infiltrate as much and retain and infiltrate as much rainwater that they could. So in order to put all these ideas into practice, the municipality needed to find out a place to apply them. And the place was the enlargement of Cerdà. First of all, not only because it's agreed, that is the idea that is behind the superblock, but also because, as you can see in the picture, in the slide, there is an area, or there is the area with high levels of pollution and with a high volume of through traffic. So they decided to put this idea of the superblocks into practice in the enlargement, and in order to do that, they started a phase of implementation, no? A process of implementation, sorry. Well, you have the numbers here. So the superblocks in the enlargement are going to transform 21 green streets, and they are going to create 21 squares in the junction of those streets, no? So the whole idea is to move from the streets of the 19th century to the streets of the 21st century, trying to mix all these ideas that I have been talking about, no? Understanding it as a new environment and infrastructure that is super important in the city of Barcelona, as I have told you at the beginning of my talk, no? Also to create a network of proximity of pedestrian spaces, and also areas for the kids to play. It is also a place to prototype and to use new materials, especially when we are talking about sustainable urban drainage system, no? And it's also a place for accessibility, for universal accessibility. So we have the streets, and in the junction of those of the grid, we also have the possibility to transform this intersection into new squares that have more or less the same size and of some of the squares of the district of Gracia, no? Okay, so in order to do that, 1 year and a half, more or less, they launched a competition for the first 4 streets and the first 4 squares, 4 plazas. So as you have seen, first there has been like a kind of technical strategy for the whole city, then tactical urbanism way of understanding and to rebalance the technical strategy, and then a design competition. And luckily, we won one of the squares, one of the plazas, and a new phase started. So at the beginning, after the competition, the municipality decided that the 8 teams, the 14 of the plaza and the 4 teams, winning teams of the squares, were going to work together, sharing knowledge, but also creating like a kind of collaborative way of decision about the materials, but also about the vegetation, but also trying to make a balance in between the programmatic uses of the streets and the plazas, so to give the whole urban project coherence, no, and balance. They also create a central project office and an advisory board. We used to meet each 2 weeks during 7 months. So all the executive projects, all the construction projects were done and finished in 7 months. So it was really a challenge, no? And okay, I'm just going to show you the square that we are doing, but you need to understand it into this huge shift of urban model and transformation of the city. This is our small plaza, And since the very first beginning, we also understood that this junction, we chose this square, this junction, because in the 19th century, the enlargement of Cerdà used to have empty and green gardens in the blocks, no, inside the blocks. But due to the housing development and to the market, they were infilled with other uses. And the fact is that the enlargement of Cerdà now has really few empty inside gardens. No? So the dots that you see are the ones that have been recovered after a big effort of the municipality during the last decade. No? And we wanted to introduce this idea of a garden, not of a square. Also, because as I have told you at the beginning of the presentation, Barcelona has really small and medium gardens, but not big gardens. And this junction is linked to the, or is close to the gardens of the University of Barcelona, which are quite amazing, and also the ones of the seminar, and also this big plaza, which is called the Plaza de la Tamendi. So we thought that, and this street, which is called Enrique Granados, has had been become pedestrian. So we thought that trying to introduce a garden here, we could create like a kind of bigger park in the center of the enlargement of Cerdà, and also trying to give ecological variability and different phenomenological ways of engaging with nature for citizens. It's not only about a plaza with trees or a street with streets. Is something that was unexpected in the city. No? So this is how this small area of the junction of those two streets, Consell de Cent and Enric Granados, look today. And hopefully this is how it's going to look in less than a year, because the works have already started 2 months ago. Here you can also see some of the images of, let's say, the present, and this idea of creating the garden and to give the citizens the opportunity to have a quiet place. You need to know that also the enlargement of Cerdà is one of the most noisiest areas in the city of Barcelona, and it's also quite monotonous. So we thought that introducing a kind of wildness in the center of the city could help to think about this future challenge that we have due to climate change effects and also biodiversity loss. That's why we also choose species that change with the seasons, no? So, and the morphology of the square is also linked with trying to keep all the vegetation that we found in the place. But at the same time, if you look at the section, you will realize that it's not a plaza, it's not only a garden, it's a huge sustainable urban drainage system. No? So it's about this idea of trying to retain and infiltrate as much water as we can, because all the data information that we have is that in the next years, in the future, as you know, at least in Barcelona, we are going to have a scarcity of water in the summer period that is going to become larger, but then we are going to have intense and small periods of heavy rains. And the drainage system that the city have is not enough, so all the urban regeneration projects need to introduce this idea of dealing with the water cycle. No, so all these green areas, in fact, are designed to retain, clean, and then infiltrate the water to the aquifer. And at the same time, as we, as you have seen, we are in these ages with the gardens of the university and the seminar. We also, from the very first beginning, wanted to try to create a huge palette of ecological variability and of vegetation. So we introduce in these different green areas like a kind of botanical garden nearby the gardens of the university, a Mediterranean one, and also a rain garden. No? So each of the areas were designed in order to transform the imaginary of green spaces and introducing wild species in the city to also let us think that in the future green areas in the city would need less maintenance and less water. So little by little we need to change it. But this is a really central area of the city, so we try to make a kind of balance, no? And also take this as an opportunity to create areas for birds, for butterflies, and for the other species. So each of the species that we chose are linked with this kind of ideas, no? So well, so hopefully this is how it's going to look in 7 months. And this is how we envision this idea of, instead of having a plaza, trying to create a social hub in between the big green grid of green spaces of the city, in the enlargement of Cerdà, giving back to the citizens the garden that through many years of housing development have been lost, no? And to move to another area of the city of Barcelona that we are working on. I know that here you don't have waterfronts, but you have riverfronts, and you also have lakes. It's also interesting to think about the future in all these areas that are linked to the water, because you know that due to climate change effect, all the water bodies are changing, no? So in a way, they are laboratories of change, no? All the borders that we have in between the earth, in between the land and the water, in this case, in between the land of the coast, are areas where we can think about the challenge that we need to face, and new topologies and new ways of doing that, no? So again, the municipality of Barcelona is transforming this area of the city. It's the last area of the waterfront of the city of Barcelona that needs to be, let's say, reurbanized. Nowadays, as you can see in the images, a parking lot. So the idea is transform it into a big park. I have told you that we don't have big parks in the city of Barcelona. Also an area with good climatic conditions for the population in these heat waves. But there is a huge problem is that, as you can see in the image, almost all the coast of the city of Barcelona is artificial. And the two rivers that we have, the Besòs and the Llobregat, are canalized, so they are not carrying sediments at all. So in order to have the beaches, we need to nourish them each 2 years, so it's 3 years. And due to climate change effect, what we know now is that by 2100, with, let's say, 64 centimeters of high level rise, the erosion is going to be 40 meters. So that is to say that in Barcelona, all the beaches of the city are going to disappear because we don't have money and energy to nourish them every 2 or 3 years. And that is a huge public transformation, because the beach is not only a place for sunbathing in Barcelona, it's also a place for people to gather, it's also a place for people to do exercise and sports, no? And this project is trying to envision a different way of creating a waterfront, no? This is a project that has been designed by Barcelona Regional. Then I think that 6 months ago, more or less, no, at the end of last year, 1 year, they held a competition. The competition was won by Steiko and Marty France, and we are also part of the team. And now we are doing the construction phase. In fact, we have the deadline in a month. So these images are images of the project that was designed by Barcelona Regional. But the main strategies are here, no? Again, as all the public spaces that are being transformed in the city of Barcelona, there has been a huge effort of the municipality to talk with the neighborhoods and with the people, and to understand how public spaces can help the facilities that they need. For example, new areas for sports or for education or wherever, no? So there was a long period to, in a way, make this kind of co-production, no? For sure, the idea is to create this big park, trying to think about the future and the climatic conditions and the species that could survive, and so on and so forth. The other important idea was trying to increase the connection with the neighborhoods. The Olympic Games, as you know, in Barcelona were really important, but in a way, the public space that was created was not really connected with the neighborhoods. And here we have, again, a really dense urban fabric. And this public space needs to be not only for tourists, it needs to be linked with the people in the neighborhoods and that are close, no, to the area. And the other challenge was deal with climate change effect, no? So it's how to do today a project that is going to be transformed due to climate change effect. So the main idea was to move all the activities that we have in the beach in the park. No? Today, the beach of Barcelona has a width of 26 meters, and I don't know how width it will be in February with the next storms. No? So where here you can see, is this idea of creating not only a park, but a kind of artificial, elevated, and resilient beach, understanding that this waterfront is going to be transformed, not now, not in 10 years, but in the future. So what I find beautiful of this project and of the project of the superblocks is this idea of, let's say, utopian pragmatism. It's kind of solving today the problems that the people have, but taking into account the future, and the changes in the future. So for the first time in the history of the city of Barcelona, the waterfront is not going to have a wall in between the city and the beach. It's going to have a lot of these kind of stair terraces that will allow the people to engage with water, and with the beach, and that in the future, with the changing conditions, if we are not able to nourish the beach, it will become the end of the city, although they are not today. So as I have told you, that means to move a lot of activities and to introduce in the park a lot of activities, programmatic uses that today are doing in the park. And I think that this is the same strategy, as I have told you, in all the areas close to the rivers, so close to the lakes, in all these areas that are going to suffer huge changes due to the effects of climate change. So it's not going to be totally a green park. It's going to be like a kind of hybrid, a kind of prototype beach park, and something that we don't have in the city of Barcelona. So it's also cool to think about new typologies of public spaces, and to think that even today we can invent new type of huge, large public spaces. So, well, just to finish, what I want to say is that I believe that the design of public space today necessarily implies a certain utopian pragmatism. So I mean, solve the daily problems of the citizen today, and at the same time think about the planetary limits and the future impacts of climate change. And this is only possible if you have a systemic vision of the city. It's not about urban design. It's about the metabolism of the city today and tomorrow, and the evolution and the design of that transformation as a resilience one. And if you have that model in your mind, it's easy to work with people and to reach agreements about how to transform and how to change, and not only the materiality, but the programmatic uses of the city today. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Yeah, utopian pragmatism, I think that would be also a good headline for the whole evening or for the whole series. We're moving on to our talk, and you can both come back up. Maybe you can sit in the middle, and we welcome our local respondent, Michael Obrist, which I'm introducing while he's coming up. Michael Obrist studied in Vienna and in the UK. He's a co-founder of Feld 72 Architects in Vienna, founded in 2002. Involved in lots of projects on different scales, lots of housing projects. And since 2018, he's a professor at the Institute of Housing and Design at the TU Wien. Welcome, Michael. So, my first idea was to just ask you, Michael, what have you learned today? But I think I'm going to be a bit more specific, also because we have about half an hour, so we have lots of things to go through. Something that occurred to me in both of your lectures, which was very crucial, I think, to all of these projects, is the political aspects and the aspect of democracy, that how important the city government was, or the interaction with the city government and the democratic process of installing was the model of cooperative housing in your case, and also all these two phases of the superblocks, of the super villas. So, I mean, that's the question then to you, how you see that, how if that was really some kind of process of democratization on the level of the city. And Micha, maybe is it something that that occurred to you, or that you think it's something that's special in Barcelona, occurring in actually a quite short period of time? Or do you have any questions to our two guests?
Yeah, thank you very much. Brilliant project, and also the attitude. So you were showing us the last project. You were making a reference to 1992, to the moment when the city in a certain way was changing through intellectuals and activists and artists and architects trying to shape the city through the Olympics, no? And in a very similar way, something happened in Vienna around this decade. From a shrinking city, it became again a growing city. And I think if you speak about the social, and that's what you pointed out, also with this kind of density problem, there are one of these hidden motives how a city works. Obviously, it's how many people do encounter in space per square meters, and how is my city structures, and also the idea of that, what a city in the end does, and how a democratic response to this kind of needs might be. And I think so that what is always driving me, because I'm not from Vienna, but I came here, so I'm always mesmerized still what is happening here at one point. And because it's a city of care and a city of caretaking, but this care is organized by the city structure itself. And when I looked at your city, or when I go through your city, which I deeply love, it's one of my favorite cities, there's something else going on in public space. Obviously, you can relate it maybe to a history, the more Mediterranean history of social encounters, etc. And I think that's really interesting how this overlapping of taking ground activism, so that's what happens with Podemos, etc. I think it did not happen like that in the city of Vienna, obviously, because Vienna historically is a city where the revolution have not been taken to the streets. They might have been taken to the arts. But like empires here, the last empires have not gone away by the people. And I think that's also something interesting, that there is a kind of a social sphere which exists also in Vienna, but it's less in numbers, it's smaller, because there is a caretaking city structure, and you see it in the exhibition, how it was possible with a very unique approach to put these two things together. But I think in the idea of democratization, that for me is still a very interesting point, and which is, it's a deep question for me. Does this kind of system of care create a less strong civic society? Whereas we find here civic societies, or we now made researches in Italy, mainly in Rome, where the absence of state creates a civic society, and where there's an enormous process of self-organization. And I think what is here fascinating in Vienna is that radical movements are taken in, they become a little bit more moderate, but become a strategy of the city itself, and became part of this kind of strategy of the city to deal with housing as a soft social engineering, I would say. And from an idea of social housing, it becomes society housing. That what we showed us, or mainly you, was obviously something different, because it operates on this kind of level of empowerment, inclusiveness. All the members of those who lived in that house made a process which make them become, in a certain way, more conscious, more. I think it was community shaping through the process itself. Here, what we see here, in my opinion, is obviously we have also Baugruppen, we have these fantastic things, we have Habitat, we have Mietshäuser Syndikat, which do the same thing. But that what the city structure does, obviously creates a different kind of citizenship. A citizenship, in my opinion, of expectations. Because you get a service system and you expect that. Whereas that what you showed us, it's a system of precarity and something where you have to take over again. But obviously there's a revolutionary moment in it when something like this becomes political and becomes administrative, etc. And that's also very interesting in that sense. But obviously that what I said before, that it was a shrinking city, meant that was similar to Plan Sedan, the Gründerzeit structure. And we have the Otto Wagner plan for a metropolis of 3 million people, which Vienna is still hoping to become. But when you look at this time, they speak about the anonymity of the city, no? That you go to the city and you become a different person, but not through community, but through anonymity. And right now I think the changing paradigm of cities is community. So if you go to cities, we have the dissolvement of family, but we have a nucleus of self-chosen friends, which become family, which becomes a support structure, etc. But that's what you then could react to, like the Plan Sedan was given. And I think that's, still, for me, it's always magical to see it, that you make a plan and 100 years later still people are operating on it like it was a computer code. And it has this an unbelievable flexibility, where you could insert something like your block, etc. And I still find it fascinating that there is this kind of unbelievable infrastructure of the plan, which we still don't have. The expansion of Vienna right now has to deal with villages which were incorporated in the city with a completely different spatial structure. We have a complete different environment in those areas where we accept the inner city filament, or like this area here, where we don't have, where we have a background. But I found still, to respond to the main question of democratization, for me the main question remains, does a care system produce less civic society?
So you can respond to the response. I think it's switched on. It's
yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I think that it's about democratization, but how I feel what is happening in Barcelona now is that it's more than democratic, it's political. In the best way of understanding what political means, no? And I think that it has become not only democratic from the point of view that everybody can give ideas or ask for the needs. It has become political because I think that the politicians have been able to explain citizens that there is a close relation in between their quality of life and the quality of life of the planet, and that the city has become a mediator in between humans and non-humans, and in between the citizens and the big city that we have, that is this planet. That's why it has become not only democratic, but also political. And that means that in order to transform that challenge in something not only utopian, but also practical, we need to construct a model. And that's how all these ideas, so we talk and the people is able to explain their needs, and the different neighborhoods are able to ask for a place for the children, so for a place for education or for elderly people, but in a model that has a ceiling of ecological boundaries and also a base of citizen rights. No, so and the transformation and design needs to create the path and the structure to link all those things. No, so it's more than democratic.
Maybe when you raised this question, I was thinking that precisely when Barcelona en Comú entered to the government, to the power, it was a kind of a discussion in the social movements, because suddenly, normally when you have kind of a party, maybe it's kind of in a different political line, you are in a kind of in a defensive way, no? You are kind of always kind of trying to push for things to stay in an alert, no? But it was precisely a kind of also a moment where it was even a reflection that when the Spanish society made the shift from the dictatorship to the democracy, it was also a moment of confidence to the institutions and this politicization. And it was also a moment now that from the neighborhoods and certain institutes, like for example in Sants or Labor, so it was a desire to have certain levels of autonomy, and it was really important to understand that because there is kind of a left party, progressive left party, they are willing to do everything. So I think it was a moment where it was a kind of an assumption of co-responsibility, and it was also from one side this idea that we have to be active, and we have to still building a kind of in an autonomous way. But in the other side, there was an empathy, and it was a way to really listen what it's been built from the bottom, and starting to establish this kind of synergies. And I think that it was interesting to really think that we are still responsible of that, and not to really kind of relax, and all the time understand that there can be a political shift. And maybe the city have to be really resilient about that. And I think that we are in a moment where the right parties, the far right parties, are even growing also in Spain. So we are quite skeptical about also how we can be independent about the system to really understand the public realm as from the ones from the community, no? And at the same time, I think this idea of democratization, it's as part of this idea that we are responsible about that, and we have to be active. And in the other way, that from Barcelona en Comú, from the city, if in the Olympics they changed to the infrastructures, to kind of even the landmarks of the city, now it's this idea to go to the smaller scale. And one urbanist, and also I think I listened these words from Boigas, Boigas' son, who is in the metropolitan area. It was like Barcelona was like a paella, like working with the streams and the main kind of pieces, and now it's a moment for the rice. And also this idea of just also this understanding of the complexity of the different areas and how the model has to be adapted. It's not kind of a one big model, it's just a kind of a procedures, a way of operating. And I think that this idea of caring intersectionality, it's also became complex. But at the same time, I think Cerdà was also this way of coding these different levels on the neighborhood. So it was something really present in the tradition of the city, and I think that we are also trying to be coherent with that, no? But for me, it's kind of both sides of this idea of democratization, but which maybe it's kind of linking. And the last thing that I wanted to say, that it's interesting because they are trying to understand the city in many levels. And for example, we have been like the urban part of the blocks, but there is also certain policies which are called like the social block and the integral blocks, which are trying to understand how the social services, how the distribution of care are also organized, so through these newer structures. So it's kind of adding layers of complexity, and I think it's the way to think the urban challenges. Like with the housing policies linked to cooperativism, there is an idea of an aging population and how we can deal with about elderly people, about a way of taking care altogether, and it's through a housing policy. And in the city is the same, and all these kind of things are as part of this ADN of the city of Barcelona in a way.
It's very interesting that Josh mentioned this. Let's say these different levels on different scales, which I think you are both very aware of, and it's levels in democracy and it's also levels in planning. Like you have the house, you have the block, you have the neighborhood, you have the city, you have the planet, and you're sort of acting on all levels at once, and everything has to work on all levels at once. But of course, you know how does a block work, how does the neighborhood work. Yeah? Another aspect which I wanted to throw in the conversation is this sort of, let's say, the shift from gray to green. And I was thinking it's something we've been discussing recently here, I think, or many other cities too. I think with the experience of this super hot urban heat summers, like I think until 5-10 years ago in landscape architecture and architecture, like the ideal urban square was for us the Campo in Siena. That was our Mediterranean ideal, and it was all stone, and if you make it all stone, then Mediterranean urban life will just magically appear. Everyone will drink espresso and everyone will be happy. But now you see, well, if you have like 40 degrees for weeks, it just doesn't work like that. And the interesting thing is that you as a Mediterranean city are also going ahead with this shift in a way. Yeah? So now the ideal of the Mediterranean square is basically the forest in a way. And is it like a shift? And also like in La Borda you had the ecological aspect and the aspect of affordability. I think in the whole process was always like going hand in hand and parallel. So is that sort of or two or three of you, I mean, is it sort of a general shift in looking at the city really more from the perspective of the territory or of nature, or as you said, of the metabolism of the city, and not just like from ancient ideals of architecture, and with nature as some kind of decoration?
I think that the city is not only the urban fabric. The city is the habitat that we all share. So that means that it has a metabolic behavior, and we can manage that. But in order to do that, we need to work with all the ingredients, with the rice of the paella, no? With all the ingredients that we didn't want to look. No? So we want to, we need to work with the water cycle, we need to work with the soil, we need to work with the trees, we need to work with the bees, we need to work with the citizens, not only with architecture. So transforming the, let's say, urban public space into an infrastructure. You can call it yellow, green, blue, no? But transforming that into an infrastructure, and also is a way to create a space to control these fluxes of energy, materials, the metabolic behavior of the city, no? And at the same time, is a question of efficiency, because cities can't afford the amount of money that will be needed in order to adapt to climate change effect, in order to take into account public space as a regulator, as a mediator of all these things. No? So I think that all this movement of regeneration of the city, of transforming cities in sponge places, of transforming cities in green areas, is something that is linked with the efficiency of public space, of the efficiency of urban landscape to mediate, to become an infrastructure. No? And it's totally linked with the challenge and the hazards that we are suffering and that we are going to increasingly suffer in the future. And at the same time, other thing that I think that is really important is making all these challenges visible and legible for society in order to be aware. No? In a way, cities have been detached from nature, so we as citizens can't understand anything. No? We can't understand why when you open the water is clean or where our wastewater goes. So giving back nature, it's not nature, but it's how nature works. It's a way of giving legibility and awareness to the process and the challenge. And I think that also this is also important, no? To produce the changes in the mindset of citizens.
Yeah, maybe I only have to add that I think that we are kind of in such an extreme situation, because this summer, for example, in Barcelona was imposed, so it was super hard. I think someone said like we are going to pass from maybe 8 nights, like 8 tropical nights, to almost 100. So it's like the temperature, it's around 28, 29 grades in night, so we cannot even refresh during. So it's so extreme, and at the same time, the public resources, even the social economical status is being so kind of unbalanced, which I think that we are really forced to start establishing tools and to learning of it. And I think like Laborde really understands as a way to really deal with this scarcity in a collective way. And I think which is interesting is how we can also learn from these kind of prototypes to apply it, because at the same time, if we really want to reduce the energy consumption or kind of things in the mass of in a dense and built city such as Barcelona, it's about management. And I think that precisely the value of Laborde is this idea of learning about the collective management, even as introducing new kind of tools such energy communities with the surrounding, and this idea of pedagogy and awareness is crucial. But because we don't have option, and I think that maybe you are in a moment where, and I don't know if here where you have kind of a bigger gap in terms of climate behavior, also about resources. So we are in a moment that we have to do it, and otherwise it's kind of, and we cannot live it in the city.
Michael, as an Italian person, what are your views on Mediterranean metabolism?
First of all, I would never throw Piazza del Campo away. So I think if there would be a translation of Schachnovelle of Stefan Zweig for architecture, if you put one architect in prison and you give him just Piazza del Campo and you really understand how it works, it's enough to become a fantastic architect, and then you would not think, so you would not forget of all this kind of social. So we had since 1,000 years cities in North Africa, where also without green they were able to use architecture strategy to create coolness. And I think architecture is also a tool. So I would not say that automatically the disaster which we sometimes have created with pseudo garden allotments of the 70s of social housing blocks and a garden which you cannot touch, that is already good. I think, as you said, we have to have an idea of a model how to respond to certain kind of issues. But I think one of the most noble thing what a city can do to transform it into city sense has also to do sometimes with the spatial structure of it, and obviously it has to do with parks, etc. But I think they have their different kind of job. So I think obviously the idea of environment friendly, it's key, but I think there are so many different kind of responses, and one response might be the forest. And obviously one of the major responses, as you have infrastructure speaking, obviously are the waterfronts, and in that sense there is a gigantic threat. But I think to without taking away all the efforts which you're doing, but I think there's a tendency of greenwashing or of a very naive idea in certain kind of architecture publication what a green building is, and in that sense because it's das Naturschöne von Immanuel Kant, no? A meadow wins always against a house, no? So we are attracted by nature. We have just to, so maybe Rome wins against a meadow or something like a hill, a green hill, But I think it's obvious that green always win, and we have here also in Vienna we had some tendencies to prefer a certain kind of very naive greenness, which had nothing to do with a kind of an ecological vision, etc. But I think, yeah, obviously it's key to think about how to survive. And as you see unfortunately in southern Italian cities, the vegetation is changing because it has to survive. It becomes a North African vegetation, slowly. But still, last summer was in Turin, and still there's this banal thing like arcade, no, portico, how absolute efficient such a banal thing is in the history of architecture, which you just throw away like that, no, 100 years ago. So I think it's also very interesting to look at the archive of that. And going back to that, what you said before, I loved when you showed your praxis and the idea of these kind of prototypes, which is the pre-version of a type, no? So, and that, in my opinion, is the highest what you can achieve in architecture if you are able to create a type, because normally something which is just collectively formed. But I think that what you said on the idea of a model itself, an organizational structure, but then coming back to the idea of prototypes and types to have a response and new standards, because you have to go in scaling to solve the problem. So it's not about single houses, but I think the most interesting about your house, it can be repeated. Obviously, then it's art history discussion if the copy is less value than the other thing. But I think that's the interesting thing about architecture, this oscillating between singularity, subjectivity, objectivity, neutrality, between the archive and something else. In that sense, it would be very, very interesting to look at all these kind of prototypes or global prototypes for new cities. Also look at, obviously, this kind of efficient and banality of certain kind of urban patterns, like a Plan Cerdà, which you have proved that you can transform it, in a square, but you can transform it in a forest. You can transform it in a vision where it's more about the inside of the block, where you can create an outside, which is more urban. And I think that would be interesting to create a new normal, which is very radical. And I think in that sense, that would be interesting to work with these kind of different levels, and to make something which can be repetitive, etc., and radical the same way.
I think we have time for one more quick question or theme, then the buffet is waiting for us. But since we are here in the exhibition of the IBA New Social Housing, I think the aspect of housing or social housing shouldn't go unmentioned. In the last 2 weeks, for an article, I was talking to lots of people who are involved in Vienna in all cooperative housing projects and participatory housing projects. And the question was, among others, would that always be something for a small selection of people, or can it become mainstream? And the answer was basically, well, all of them said, no, it will not become mainstream, but it influences the mainstream. Because you always have 70 or 80% of people who just quickly want somewhere to live, and who don't have the time or the energy to just go through all these processes for years and for months. But I was wondering what you three, Michael, from your experience and you from your experience, think about that. How influential cooperative housing projects can be for the whole of society.
Well, I think that this is something that we are still always kind of discussing, because it's been kind of a short kind of period of time. And I think that probably in our case, one of the first challenges is some only just a matter of even ownership, and something that it was kind of really established by the dictatorship in the Spanish society. And I think that it's this sense of family and ownership, which was the basis of the society. So sometimes it's just a matter of breaking certain of these kind of key points, and this is the main challenge. On the other hand, I mentioned certain things. I think that precisely this idea of collective resources and management in a certain way could be quite practical, and maybe you are not interfering even the private realm. So I think that there are different levels of conviviality, I can say, or management, and in the sense also La Borda wants to be reopened. There is not a specific way of living in La Borda, so I think that there is different spaces and different even profiles, from elderly people to really young people, family, etc. And they are using the space and the project and even organizing themselves in different ways. And this is also something that was in the basis, because this idea of inclusivity or even replicability is based in a not close community with a specific ways of operating constantly. And I think that this was something that for us it was important. And at the same time, sometimes we also discuss if the process and procedures has to adapt. This idea of effort, time, networks, ways of accessing, it's also challenging for certain actors or even groups, etc. And I think that these are challenges that we are trying to address, but there is no specific process, model, and even community. So it's kind of an umbrella that can mean many things, and I think that basically it's also a matter of even to go down and understanding what means cooperative housing itself.
Yeah, I think the question is super crucial and interesting. And if you look at the facts, we see how it's changing already in the mainstream. So, but I think the main question is what is social in social housing, no? And in certain kind of areas like Switzerland, but also in certain kind of Italy, or also in the north of Italy, in South Tyrol, where we are operating. I mean, the idea of cooperative is very strong, because it's a need to, which is already bureaucratic and installed as a kind of legislative model, to be able to, within a framework between who is owning the ground, how do you operate on that, it's a way of organization society already. But if you look at the idea of common and the idea of communal living, I think it's really interesting if you look at the whole market, and also if you look at the bigger picture is, we have gigantic flows of capital, obviously, producing houses which are not even dwelt in. They are just for portfolios, and I think obviously this is the major threat of the world, which makes our cities unpayable. And the 50-minute city of Hidalgo, it's a super interesting concept, but who is able to pay 10,000 euros a square meter in Paris to be able? So the 50-minute city is if you're on the outskirts and you have a car, unfortunately, you have to go 50 minutes to a place, if you don't change the idea of that, what he said, ownership, property, etc. But also, if you look at that, what is happening for a young market, if you divide the society in the ones which are heirs and the ones which are not having heritage, no? This will be the major shift in the generations, no? And if you look at the numbers in Europe, household in Germany is in 70,000 euros, Spain, Greece, Italy, 250 to 270,000. But in this money, it's hidden the response to the non-trust and that you don't trust the social state, because there is no social state, and you have to care for your grandmother, and etc., etc. So I think there is something absolutely crucial going on there, and there is already the market responding to that, unfortunately. So creating houses for young people where they can move in, but they have communal spaces as an attractor. Obviously, there are nothing communal about, because you become a client, etc. But I think it's not hard to imagine that as a response to that, if the social state does not guarantee that what it's doing here, or you're not able to have the loans very cheaply, no? Or there is a revolution that everybody buys the houses away from the housing market, which could be done. I think there might be the private market operating on that and using that, what Netflix, etc., is doing with us, with cinema, that we have a different kind of access to housing for different kind of ways of our living, of transgeneration living, and it will be a certain kind of commodity, and we will be trapped because we'll follow that, because it's nice, it works, etc. We might have a few cities of resistance, like Barcelona, like, depending on the mayor, other cities in Europe, but we have also completely different situations where there is no way of having something like that. And I think in that sense, I think it's an absolute crucial moment right now. What do we do as a society? How do we put our money in this kind of moment, in that structure? There was the famous quote of Giancarlo De Carlo when he was saying, why do we put so much money in defense system right now? Obviously, we know why. And why should social housing be cheap? Why should it be cheap? In terms of, because it's fundamental for society. Vienna in a certain way does do that way. So you have maybe less police, but more social housing. But I think the crucial point is really in what do you invest and how can you create something like that. But it might also be that in certain areas of the world, the social is not the house itself, but it's the street and the hospitality of the people itself. So I think that has also to do with certain kind of different patterns of social behavior. And I think hospitality is one of key elements to create something social and the possibility of a street to live on it. But I think it has to do with a lot of different kind of tunings where we have to operate to create this kind of a new resilient way to create a common, but we are absolutely threatened by the others. And I'm very sure again that the attack through this kind of platform is becoming so strong because because it will not work in another way. And we have to resist.
I was thinking that cities behave like complex adaptive systems. We know that from the ecologist Howling. And that means that they have the power itself to a regenerative and adaptive way to face the challenge, no, and to face the perturbances and the hazards. So, from my point of view, what had happened through the work that you are doing and through cooperativism is a way of regenerate the housing crisis that we suffer in Spain. No? So we have, you know, that in Spain we have a huge bubble crisis. So that means that the loans were impossible for the people, no, to have and to buy a house, and at the same time there were a lot of stock of houses in the market. So there were houses, but not inhabitants of the houses, and this way of rethinking what a house means, no, and how, and this way of rethinking what it means to be an inhabitant and a citizen is a way of regenerate the political and social behavior of the city. So it's a way of it's a really ecological way of survive, no? So that means that that we are alive, that we are not in that we are in a moment of a new birth, no? That we are in a moment of a new regulatory frameworks, because one of the impacts of all these cooperativism new examples is also that they are changing the rules. They are giving diversity to the system, so they are transforming the system in something more resilient. I don't know what is going to happen in the future and how they are going to evolve, but in nature, nothing happens alone. Nature responds to the threats and to the perturbance with redundance. So, creating new types of housing or of streets or wherever. No? So, in a way, it's a really natural and ecological process of regeneration.
But we think it's I mean, would you use the term of autopoietic also for governments? Because you can have a very damp government. I'm from Italy, we have right now a very damp government, and I'm very sorry for that. So there is no kind of natural knowledge in that. So Vienna, or the Airbnb crisis which you're having, no? So, but you need just a government which is saying taxes and high taxes on that, and with that taxes we can maybe build the houses of those which are not having a house because you use all the money for 30 square meter houses with the luxury kind of furniture for me and others to go there in Barcelona for a weekend, no? So I think I would not trust, I mean, nature, yes, I would trust nature always, but I would not trust human nature. We have created, so in that sense, that kind of resistance which I see here, I think is absolutely crucial. And then it would be interesting, like in Vienna, that right Vienna, the success story was based on a tax system, and that politics can take power, go into that, and make the money flow from one side to the other. So I think that's also one of the jobs of politics itself. So I think that what you said about nature and about how we have to learn from that is absolutely true, but I would not forget the dampness of our species. No?
Yes, that is, well, that is also some kind of final word in a way. But yeah, I have to say, we can also sum up that we all should be aware of the systems in which we act, be they natural or human and or human. So I think we have to move on from the social to the socializing before we are getting thrown out of this venue here. Before, I would very much like to thank you all. Thank you very much to Christina Miriam from Barcelona. Thanks for your lectures and for your talk. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for coming. And we are looking forward to the third installment on the 11th of November when we are having guests from Belgium. Thank you very much.